Many of you will know that Wakelyns was set up by my parents, Anne and Martin Wolfe. They bought Wakelyns in 1992, and as I'll show you in a second, they started planting agroforestry in 1994. And what they evolved was a system of organic agroforestry, but it was a system they designed and they built, effectively a set of scientific experiments around the farming system. So here we are in Suffolk on the east coast. This is our land. We're 56 acres, 23 hectares. The land was bought in 3 parcels to give you that area in 1994. This is what the land looked like when my parents bought it. It was 2 enormous, well, not by some people's standards, fairly big open wheat fields. And that was the beginning. And what they started to do, this is 1994, that's my dad, not my mum, was to plant agroforestry. Now, at that point, agroforestry of this kind was relatively innovative. My dad had been a research scientist working for the government, and he continued, really, this was his retirement research. And so what they were doing was really from first principles. So they didn't have anybody to follow in terms of alley spacing or tree planting styles or whatever it was. So they really made it up from the beginning. So that was literally whips in a wheat field in 1994. This is the trees a little bit later on, and this is 2022. And we now have, I get criticised for saying mature, but we now have 30-year-old trees in what many people say is possibly the oldest, most diverse agroforestry system of this kind anywhere. And so it's become a bit of a demonstration site. Those photographs are all taken in the area where the trees are fairly large. You see the top left-hand one, that was actually taken just the other day. That's what it looks like from the air. That's some of the different areas. So it was planted in 1994 and subsequently as different areas, different styles of agroforestry. So area C is short rotation coppiced hazel, D, fruit trees, E, timber trees, B, a meadow, A, the farmyard, and around the corner there, F, short rotation willow. So each of those areas was a pioneering, really from the back of an envelope, design, different agroforestry scheme. So that's what, when my mum died in 2016 and my dad in 2019, that's what my brother and I inherited, a bit like inheriting a working windmill. Everybody wants you to keep it going. Nobody would quite do it the same way. And it's obviously a feature product. 2019, what did we do? We got together a group of friends, colleagues, farmers, bakers, neighbours, anybody interested, and had a brainstorming session. And the collective view was that we should evolve, if you like, the next generation. Wakelyns should continue as an inspirational, transformative demonstration farm and become a hub and inspiration. And that's what we've aimed to do in the following ways. So we are continuing the underlying organic agroforestry, but our systems change. We are interested in all the other dimensions of that. We are using short food chains, and I'm going to show you that in a second. We are using activity and enterprise stacking. We are very interested in the environmental component. We are very interested in research, and we're very interested in people. And that's why what we're trying to do really is to max the productivity in every sense of this 56 acres of land. Oops, sorry, gone too far. So this is just a little bit of what goes on in the existing organic agroforestry. A wide variety of apples, pears, plums, cherries, quinces, many varieties, huge mixture, very exciting, very diverse, very difficult to operate commercially, but then it was never planted to be commercial. Lovely cherries, but not in the kind of quantities that you would make a commercial operation out of because of the scale and because it was a research project. But in a way, that imperative has also forced us, liberated us to look at other ways of doing things. But one of our crops, possibly our most lucrative crop, is sticks. This is this is willow. We also coppice, short rotation coppice hazel. We made £4,000 out of a very small area last year selling hazels as sticks for hedge laying. So that's a very effective, diverse way of using our agroforestry system. This is another crop that's grown. What we have in organic, we have an organic rotation within the tree lines. It's a 4-year cycle, 2 years in cropping, 2 years in a fertility building lay. That is lentils. Literally, that photograph was taken 3 days ago, so that's this year's lentil crop in a companion crop with camelina you can see on the left-hand photograph. So that's the organic agroforestry that we are continuing with. This is growing squash, again in the agroforestry. Every time you see a picture, we plant very fast, as you can see. Every time you see a picture, you see the tree lines at the side. You see the characteristic style of agroforestry that this is, which is north-south running tree lines and in between alleys of agriculture. Here's the wheat. This is the wheat. This is the beginning of the short food chain story. We have an on-site mill. and we now have a bakery, and that's the beginnings of the short food chain story. So here we are, the short food chains. We could not make money, nowhere close to it, by selling flour, or wheat flour even, or cherries or apples, or any of those things. The only way we can make that sustainable, and that imperative has also become an opportunity, is to have an on-site bakery where Henrietta and Maisie are not just bakers and chefs, they are also intimately involved in the harvesting. So it's them who's looking at the apple trees and the pear trees and the plum trees and the cherry trees, and knowing when they are ripe and knowing when to pick them and what to do with them. And it might be dried apples, it might be apple juice, it might be apple cakes, it might be a whole range of things. And then the same across the plums and the same across the cherries. So the short food chains that comes from that. In the bottom of that picture you see there wheat and quinces, and the top left you see quince tarts. That's how we've developed the systems change, involving the people and the on-site activities to produce bread and pies and so on. Another aspect of that is that Henrietta and Maisie are the Wakelyns Bakery. They are a separate enterprise, and they are one of a number of separate enterprises that we host. So this is not us as a family running a bakery or running a veg operation, I'll show you in a second, or running a craft operation or growing hemp. Each of those is another group of people. We have a relationship with each of them, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. But that means that we are not responsible for all those activities. They are all their own businesses. And in the light of that, we now have a number of people who are making a living out of our very small area of land. That's the 4 current lead enterprises, if you like. The Woodland Haberdasher, I'll talk about her in a second. The RealVeg, CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, No Dig Horticulture, I'll talk about them in a second. Wakelyns Bakery, you've already seen that. And now we have a woman who's doing hemp to make clothes. Here's the bakery, here's them in action. You've seen a bit of that already. They've had to be very innovative with what they do with the products we have. As you saw, we grow a lot of squash. We're growing 4,000 squash this year. They have evolved all sorts of exciting things to do with squash. So they are not taking recipes and growing things to the recipe. They are making things from what we grow already as part of a sympathetic system. You see on the right-hand side there, Maisie is pouring a glass of squash. But you've never had that before. Delicious drink. Watch this space, you'll hear more of it. This then is the CSA group, another enterprise. They've taken over 2 of our alleys, and they are doing an intensive no-dig organic horticulture box scheme. They deliver boxes within 15 miles on a CSA model so that everybody buys in for the whole season as a subscriber. And if you're a subscriber, you get literally every week 1/35 of the produce. They keep 2/35 to themselves, and we get 3/35. So their rent, if you like, to us is 3/35 of their produce. So you see how each of these enterprises is doing their own innovative activity in different ways, all involving the land. There they are again, they plant very quickly as well. The third enterprise I'm going to talk about a little bit is Faye Jones, the Woodland Haberdasher. She has another short chain and another stacked enterprise. The significance of this is that she's, again, taking produce from the farm, whether that's wood or bark for natural dyeing or clay or other things, leaves for nettles and so on. We grow nettles under our solar panels. All of that, for her, is another input into her system. So this is another short chain, another stacked enterprise, all part of the system, which is delivering maximum productivity from this land, but also supporting biodiversity and tackling climate change and so on. So we see these things as all being closely interrelated. Here is Faye's dyeing stuff, all from Wakelyns produce. This is her slide. Henrietta would see the apple tree and see fruit. Faye sees the apple trees and sees bark for natural dyeing, for carving, and so on. So this is a sustainable way of maxing the productivity of a relatively small area of land. Here we are, our latest enterprise. Claire O'Sullivan set up her own enterprise growing hemp. This photograph again was taken a couple of days ago. The hemp is shooting up. She has promised me that we will have Wakelyns organic hemp clothes on the London catwalk for Fashion Week within 5 years' time. That's her promise to me. Watch this space. So again, another way of more people being part of that system. So we end up with a very complicated system, but all of those people, they are interacting enterprises, but they are all connected to the land and the activities that go on there, because that's our core activity. I had a guy say, "Can I come and make yurts in your barn?" And I said, no, that's not connected to the land and the way it works. So everybody is doing things to do with the 56 acres. And we're really doing an experiment to see how productive we can make that area be in terms of food, craft activities, clothes, if you like, people, and so on. Key to the way we're doing that is our concern for the environment, literally the local environment, but also the global environment. We are very keen on our nature. People say to me, have you got studies of what the nature was like, longitudinal studies of what there was in 1992 when your parents took over and it was like that original slide? And I say, well, look at the 1,500-acre farm next door, which this year is half beans and half oilseed rape, and look at how many hares he hasn't got, or how many deer he hasn't got, or how many turtle doves he hasn't got, or how many barn owls he hasn't got. You don't need a longitudinal study to see the difference. It's become an oasis for wildlife. And that's because of the whole system, I think, that we're operating. Other aspects of that work, we've done a lot of work with the local wildlife trust. This was last spring, so 18 months ago, on restoring an old pond. This was an old pond that used to take the runoff from our neighbour's farm. He sprays like crazy on his fields, so there was always too much nutrition in this pond. It was always green and full of algae with no biodiversity whatsoever. A year on, after the Wildlife Trust had diverted the ditch so that his water no longer flows through the ditch, we now have a lovely clear pond with a fantastic return of life, and we had the studies done the other week, and the great crested newts are back in the pond, so that's absolutely fantastic. We're interested very much in our energy use, so this is our ground source heating being put in a few years back. This was solar panels. Somebody was talking earlier on about agri-voltaics or something, and what this is actually an old picture, so it doesn't show what I'm about to explain. Faye Jones, who does a lot of work with nettles, they cook with the nettles and they use the nettles to make farm fibre. The best nettles on the farm are grown under the photovoltaics because it's relatively dark. So we now cultivate the nettles under the photovoltaics to max the benefit of that bit of land. In terms of what I showed you before, the trees, the short rotation coppice and the short rotation willow, they are used in three ways. I've already shown you the way in which we cut the willows and the hazels to make hedging products. That's our most lucrative crop, as I think I mentioned. These pictures here, that slide there, if I can go back, is the residue which is left over after we've used as much as we can as whole sticks, is then chipped. Some of the chippings are used, mulched, and used in the growing. Some of the remainder is dried and used in biomass to heat the boiler, the central heating in the house. Another example of a bit of energy, but this is a further thing that we're interested in. Very often the conversations about these kind of things are too serious. We like a bit of fun, so we like a bit of farm art. So this is it does generate a little bit of electricity, but it's actually made of scrap farm metal, and you can't quite see it in that photograph, but they're all fantastic, lovely birds that were made for us by an art welder friend of ours. So all, again, looking at the other dimensions of what we can do with this land, whether it's about creativity or about people's mental health or about their physical health, or about energy. We try and diversify in all those dimensions. We're trying to do a lot of work around research. We've got a number of people now with PhD projects going on and MSc projects going on, but we've also got a lot of work going on with the Organic Research Centre. This was last summer. They are working as part of an EU project called AgriMix, looking at, I think, 8 farms across Europe, agroforestry farms that have been there a relatively long time across Europe. You see the pink dots. Those were their sampling locations. You can see different areas of our land, but also into our neighbour's land. The brown area at the bottom is his agri-desert land. And they've done a lot of sampling around, you can see the spider counting from the pitfall traps, also these very sensitive sound measuring devices from which they can get a profile of the birds and the insects and do some plots. They did a whole range of experiments again this year, and I think that project is ongoing. So we are very keen to play our part in their work and the wider European work, looking at what happens with agroforestry systems longer term. I've mentioned already people. We think farming and regenerative farming in particular is not just about the land and the soil, it's also about the people. I've talked about employment and activities like that. I'm not sure I mentioned we now have the people you've heard me talk about, depending on how you count it, probably 6 or 7 FTE, full-time equivalent people who are making a living out of that area of land. We're quite proud of that, compared to the neighbour who's 1,500 acres. I think he employs a couple of tractor drivers. So again, it's about how much we can get in a sustainable way out of that land, and that doesn't include me and my wife, Amanda. We're not the people making money out of the land. In terms of our interest in people and fun, our art world friend again. She produced us some lovely scrap metal labels for our tree alleys. And here's another example of community and people. One of the synergistic things that happen when you start doing things in the way we're doing is that people want to come and help you. We get a lot of people wanting to come and volunteer. This was a community tree planting day where we had 80 people coming and help plant trees. We find that once you shout about these things, lots of people want to come and visit you and join in and come on open days and so on. And it becomes a much less lonely activity than perhaps I think some farming may be. In terms of, there's another community activity that we organised last summer. We're going to do the same again this year. This was my daughter's Instagram post. We had a butterfly day for the community, which was everything from serious butterfly identification with some serious experts through to make your butterfly cake, weave your butterfly wings, kind of fun. Brings in people from the local community, brings in the local schools, brings in local journalists, gets the message out there in a way which we think is really valuable. In terms of shouting about it, we also think it's really important to tell people all the good things that people can do through this kind of farming. So the top left is a German biodynamic magazine, and you'll see the photo there. That's the same photo I started with. That's the aerial photograph of our site. Bottom left is Chris Packham, you'll know, James Wong, bottom right. So we're very interested in getting kind of media coverage because huge amounts of good things are being done all over the place, but if we can get more coverage for it in popular environments like Gardener's Question Time, or James Wong was making a film for BBC World that was broadcast with a viewership of 40 million across the world, we think that's a really important and useful thing to do. Again, about people and about another way of bringing an income stream and a way of people enjoying themselves, back to the fun. We built these glamping pods. As you see, they're on little legs. They move around, or we move them around, I should say. They don't move around on their own. We move them around between the alleys, and they are part of our organic rotation. So as I mentioned, we have a 4-year organic rotation. 2 years are in a fertility building lay at any one point. They will always be in the alleys in the fertility building lay, and we move them within those alleys to rest the ground. So we've not turned farmland into a glamping site. We have, within our organic rotation, we rotate people as well, and those people can then come and have fun or learn or do events or help work with us or whatever it may be. So again, we found that not just an income stream, but it's an important part for us of the systems change that is involved in not just changing farming practices, but the influence that can have on a wider world. Again, in terms of people, we welcome groups of people. These are all sorts of groups of people: Land Workers Alliance, OFRC team, ORC team, different groups of people have all come, visited, stayed. We encourage people to come because, again, we think it's really important to get the message out. One of the things we're most proud of, if you like, this may sound a bit weird, that we managed to secure in all of this was that it became very clear, going back to the people working on the site, that the people who were working there can make a living out of a bakery or a craft operation or whatever it might be, but they can't earn enough to afford to live in the local area. We don't have a particularly different local housing crisis to anybody else. I suspect it's the same everywhere, but you can't do a job which is essentially a minimum or living wage job and afford to rent even a small flat in our local area. It's just not possible. So we went big hoo-ha, it's still indeed going on, with the local planning authority, and we secured planning permission for caravans, but as you know, the definition of a caravan is very is such that you can have actually quite substantial lodges or whatever, and we've secured the planning permission for rural workers, so not seasonal agricultural workers, which is the classic sort of mobile home occupancy, but rural workers. So the people who work in the bakery or Faye, the Woodland Haberdasher, can live on site in an affordable way. And that is actually, again, fundamental to the economics and the social operation of our whole project, because they wouldn't be able to sustain their positions without that. So we can have 6 or 8, or in due course, I hope, more people living, working and succeeding on site because of a combination of all of those things. So that, in a way, was... people have said that was sort of very pioneering and have asked us how we did it. So it's been a good journey to go through. It's interesting that Oxford University has a map of what they call nature-based solutions worldwide to the biodiversity and climate change crises. And what's very interesting about the sites that they choose across the world is that they are all sites who are doing things involving people. they're not just, I don't mean this in a rude sense, they're not just sites which are sequestering carbon or protecting birds or whatever it might be. Their interest, and they see it in the same systems terms that I'm describing, is in projects and situations that are involving people, involving workers, involving public access, whatever it may be. So we're very pleased to be on their map for that, and we really hope that there will be more farms doing similar things and evolving in these kind of ways, because nothing we've done is special or unique to us. The one advantage that we had in evolving the project this way was the established organic agroforestry, but all the other things are all things which have happened in the last couple of years. The other things that have bring in the people and the increase the biodiversity and so on are all things that we have done more recently, and I don't think there's anything that we've done that anybody else couldn't do with 50 acres, which is a tiny area of land. So in a sense, my sort of invitation come challenge to people with huge areas of land is to say, look, put over 50 acres of your much bigger farm or whatever and see if you can evolve the project or see if you can do some of these sorts of things, because it really is, I think, I'm quite proud of what we've done, and it seems to be going in a good direction and people are interested in it. These are examples of farms in East Anglia that were inspired by Wakelyns in terms of the agroforestry. So Wakelyns has the 25-year-old trees that nobody else has. We're delighted that other farmers come to Wakelyns and look at our agroforestry and say, oh, I can do that. And so you see how these are all effectively modelled on versions of the Wakelyns agroforestry, so that's great. One of the things that led us to do last year was to set up something called Agroforestry Open Weekend, and this is now a naked plug. 2 years ago we had 5 farms, this year we had 10 farms, including in Ireland. Agroforestry Open Weekend works like open gardens or open studios in that each of the farms does their own thing, but on the same weekend. But we have a common, a central advertising publicity, if you like. So put in your diary, 19 to 21 May 2023. That is Agroforestry Open Weekend next year. There will be agroforestry farms open across the UK and we hope beyond. If you're a farmer with an agroforestry site and you'd like to join in, please get in touch with me. We'd love to. Well, we are going to be recruiting more, and I'm optimistic that we'll recruit a lot more next year. And then make a weekend of it and go around and look at different people's agroforestry projects and celebrate all that there is in agroforestry. So agroforestryopenweekend.org, 19 to 21 May 2023. That's what we're doing at Wakelyns. That's Wakelyns 2022. Thanks very much. I think I've got about 7 minutes for questions. So give me the thumbs up from the lady over there. That one? Sorry.
Hi, that was inspirational. If you can do that on 50 acres, it's absolutely astounding. Did it take you a long, because you had quite a lot of investment to do in all the different bits, did it take you a long time to get the money back off your investment?
Oh, we haven't begun to get the money back off our investment yet. My dad only died in 2019, and Amanda and I kind of moved in spring of 2020. So we've only been, the evolution is in the last 2 years, really. And but the money has gone in buildings mostly. Yeah. At the moment it's out there, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic we can be at least as financially sustainable as any other farming, which, bear in mind, is entirely dependent on subsidies.
Hi, David.
Hello.
Thank you. Yeah, well, great presentation. Thank you. I was just wondering a couple of things. Very interesting what you do with these stacking enterprises. I wonder if it will be possible to know a bit more about what is the arrangement that you have with them. Do you work like in terms of licenses or tenancies, sure, and how long they are? And the second question will be, let's say if you want to reproduce a similar experience in terms of stacking enterprises and working with people.
Okay, so
every place is different. Sorry, yeah. I'm just...
No, sorry. Every one of the relationships is different, is the answer to your question. None of them are directly financial, and I think that's really important because that's created a relationship of collaboration. So they don't see themselves... I've been to places which in a sense are similar but different, which felt a bit like a sort of business park, where you had a series of enterprises doing their own thing but not really collaborating. Because our teams are not paying us any money, as I say, we get a share of the vegetables, for example, their interactions with us and each other are much more collaborative which I think is really helpful. I think it's fundamental to the way it's working. We have written agreements. I mean, I'm a lawyer by my day job is as a lawyer. We have written agreements, so it's all formalised, but on a non-traditional kind of basis, I suppose you'd say.
Hi, thanks. Your farm's really beautiful. I really hope I can come and see it. I'm really curious about your neighbours. That photo is very stark, that you've got this oasis of biodiversity and variety, and it's really green and lush, and then something that's quite stark in comparison. I'm wondering if you have ever spoken to your neighbours, if they would be open to maybe being inspired by the work that you've done.
I have to be slightly careful because I think this is going on YouTube. So, so I think we didn't start well with our neighbours. So obviously my parents were there from 1992. We started in 2 years ago. Didn't start terribly well because the 3 farms around us are in a pheasant shooting consortium, and Wakelyns is in the middle of their consortium. And my dad used to let them come and shoot on our land, and my brother and I said that had to stop because we're not in favour of that kind of sport shooting, if you like. And they were not happy, but they understood. So that wasn't a great start. And then when we applied for planning permission, I think some people in the area thought we were going to set up a holiday camp or who knows what they were. So there was a bit of pushback about that. And I'm sure at some level, they're farming in very conventional modern ways. I mean, one of our neighbours said to me in a moment of sort of anger, she said, "David, we have no choice but to farm like this." And I said, "I'm not sure that's right. You do have a choice," but she doesn't see it that way. I think she's a prisoner of the farm subsidies mechanisms, is perhaps what she's saying. So if the farm subsidies mechanisms changed, she could change. So our relationship, but the other thing, and the guy whose land that is, the big brown area, I don't think he sees himself as anything other than a financial machine, if you like. He doesn't see himself as, he barely keeps the footpaths open. He doesn't want us to encourage more people to use the footpaths, for example. He's not interested in wildlife and so on. So I think his driver is a very financial one. So in a way, he's sort of interesting antithesis to what we're doing, which is to have a much more multidimensional approach to it. But he is what he is. Hello, there's the lady.
I'm interested in your rural worker definition, and being a lawyer must have helped you in that. You said it was pioneering, so that presumably hasn't been done elsewhere, but could help an awful lot of other farmers throughout. Yes. Yeah, there.
I mean, actually, if you look at that now, post-pandemic, that would catch somebody who's working from home from a job in the city, ironically. So almost anybody would be caught by that. I mean, we were quite straightforward with our local authority because they sort of said to us initially, well, are these people needed to look after livestock overnight or whatever? And we said, no, we're not going to make that argument. We're not going to run the traditional sort of agricultural worker essential to be on site because kind of argument. We were very clear in saying to them, this is because they can't afford to live in the area, which in a way, I mean, the planners were quite sophisticated about it. The planners realised that in effect wasn't an argument about us, that's an argument about lack of rural affordable housing, generically.
And rural workers.
And rural workers. And we're not just rural agricultural workers, but the people who work in the shops or the people who, it's a much bigger problem. So,
but not the city, because it's very specific about the types of work. So I can't help thinking that could be adopted in all sorts of places. Yeah. If only planning authorities, if it could be better known by local authorities in other areas.
Well, certainly lots of people have written to me and I've shared that information with them. Yeah. I should just say, in case it wasn't obvious, we're continuing to try and recruit, if that's the right word, more enterprises. I don't know what our capacity is because some people need land, some people need buildings, some people need a combination of those things. We've got half a dozen, depending on how you count it now, but I'm always interested in other projects. People come along and say, David, you should have sheep or a brewery or this or that. And I say, no, you come and do sheep, you come and do a brewery. I'm not doing it, I'm just a facilitator. Oh, one more.
Yeah. How did you select the distance between the rows of trees, and would you still do it the same width?
So it was my parents who selected the distance between the trees, and they were 12, 15 and 18 metre spacing alleys, and absolutely people don't do it that narrow anymore. I don't know of anybody who's doing this kind of agroforestry who's anything like that narrow. The ones I've seen are all twice that, 20, 25 metre, and often wider tree belts as well, depending on what they're doing. So As I said, my parents were starting with no blueprint, if you like. I don't think it's problematic yet in terms of the closeness of them. Obviously, it means we've got a lot more trees compared to the strips in between. We're doing a bit of an experiment this year because for the first time we're growing lentils in the area where the trees are tallest and therefore where the shading is greatest. And so, having previously grown lentils in a more open area of the farm, we're taking a risk that they won't get enough sunshine. The wheat seems to be fine in those alleys. Lentils might not be so happy, but I don't think anybody is doing it that narrow now. That's why it's a working windmill rather than a working modern site.
And your wheat, you're still using the Wakelyns?
We're still growing the Wakelyns YQ and Q populations. Yeah. So they're now in their 19th, I think, season. But obviously, other people are now also growing the population wheats. That's a story for another day. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Do come and visit 1921 May next year. If you're a farmer, please let me know. Come and join in the weekend. But other people come and visit. Look at our website, sign up for our newsletters, and share your ideas with us because we're always looking for new ideas. Anyway, thanks very much, everybody.